Ukrainian President Zelensky doubled down on his terms for negotiations with Russian President Vladimir Putin and called for an end to the war only if Putin is prepared to negotiate, get this, face-to-face, and added that Putin's withdrawal of troops out of Ukraine would mark the first step in negotiations.
The Ukrainian president has taken center stage at this year's World Economic Forum in Davos and has received standing ovations from the world's global elites. During a virtual address, Zelensky called for maximum sanctions against Russia, including a complete oil embargo, isolation of all Russian banks from the global financial system, and abandonment of Russia's IT sector, and suspension of trade with Russia. So what do you think about that, Kim?
I mean, I don't expect him to call for anything less than this.
Right,
I mean, I think Zelensky's job, right, as president of Ukraine is to call for the maximum of absolutely everything. He's fighting a war, so he should be calling for complete, eradication of Russia off the face of the planet. I mean, why not call for that? That's fine for him to call for it. The issue is how everyone else responds to it and how the rest of the world, how they respond to Zelensky's asks and how they encourage him. And are they encouraging him to continue on that path of complete obliteration of Russia, let's say? Or are they actually trying to get him to come to the table and negotiate for peace? And what's interesting about what's going on in Davos is that we're seeing there is a lot of consensus there. Zelensky did get standing ovations, but there are still some, it's not like complete consensus in Davos. We are seeing some step forward and say, is this really a good idea? You have some people, leaders coming in from the Middle East saying, is this whole going and grabbing, taking the Russian oligarchs' stuff, their Western investments, what is it called again? Repossessing I'm having a brain moment here, but going and taking their assets or freezing their assets, is that really a good precedent to set? That is going to actually maybe discourage others from around the world to want to invest, to have investments in Western nations. And then you get other leaders that are saying, and maybe this whole thing is going to lead to, like even George Soros, he actually told a crowd in Davos that the invasion may be the beginning of World War III and added that our civilization may not survive it. So you've got these leaders that are saying, are we going down the right path? So it's really kind of interesting it's not like full on consensus of yes, okay, we all must do this against Russia. A lot of people are saying there's going to be some fatigue, war fatigue. Once winter hits, especially, we've got food shortages, rising costs of energy. Europe's not getting the gas they need to stay warm. What is going to happen? Are people going to say, okay, time to give it up, Ukraine?
Yeah, I think those are good questions because Zelensky sounds like a man gambling with somebody else's chips. And those chips are being provided by the United States. And also some of those chips are the lives of people who live in Ukraine, who are the ones that have to endure the consequences of this ongoing crisis. The food shortages that everyone is anticipating are not likely to affect Americans and have Americans going hungry in the same way that other parts of the world are going to be affected. And there is something that's so detached about someone from a country that is relatively small and powerless, speaking with so much bass in their voice, as the kids say, about an ongoing conflict with a nuclear power that is Russia. And I think that people who, again, are bringing forth a conversation about the potentiality of World War III are right to do so. It's always something that's looming on the horizon. And I think it's just so irresponsible for folks to be cheerleading this as though there aren't some really extreme, cataclysmic potential consequences here.
Right.
Yeah.
And there is a big crowd in Davos calling for that. There is a big crowd there that are saying, no, we've got to do everything we can to stop Russia at all costs.
That is how the people of Ukraine feel as well, right? Zelensky does have tremendous popularity with his people. They want to soldier on.
Debatable.
It seems.
I think that is debatable.
It seems like they want to fight, that they are not going to let the country go.
Again, that is totally debatable. Like, for example, there's been at least 13 attacks on recruitment centers, domestic attacks on military recruitment centers inside Ukraine. The people are not happy with conscription. So we are seeing an increase of these little, instances of revolting from the Ukrainian people. You've got a lot of Ukrainians trying to flee the country. We saw them leave en masse. That is not a symbol of wanting to stick around and fight for the country. The men were stopped at the border. They were forced to turn around and go fight for the country. So I don't know, when they have like, okay, so they conduct these polls, for example, and they'll say, well, overwhelmingly Ukrainians say that it's that they want they don't want to end the war until Crimea is won back, until Russia gives back Crimea. Well, they didn't ask a single person in Crimea when they asked that, when they were taking the poll. They didn't ask anybody in the Donbass how they felt about it. They selectively ask people just all the way in Western Ukraine, which is a very different group of people than the people in Eastern Ukraine. It's a very divided country between, there's the Russian speakers and the Ukrainian speakers. And so I don't know if there is, of course, our media is going to tell us, yes, there's absolute consensus. They all want to fight and die for their country. There are then other reports coming out that make you question that. Why are they then sabotaging their own military recruitment centers?
So, I'm sure someone is in the regions you mentioned, but I don't know. It seems pretty clear that there's will to fight on in the western part of Ukraine. Maybe I'm wrong about that, but
well, in the western part, but isn't that the whole point, that before this conflict emerged, there was this not straight down the middle, but pretty obvious geographic split between eastern and western Ukraine. And my understanding was that once the conflict started, some people who were sympathetic to Russia became frustrated because they got caught in the crosshairs of the activity and said, okay, well, even if I had pro-Russia sympathies, I'm not wild about the invasion itself. And I feel like that sentiment is in flux as people assign blame differently over time to the circumstances that they're living in as the conflict extends and extends and extends. Do you see it, if initially you were pro-Russia or had sympathetic to Russia and Russian speaking in the eastern region, but then were frustrated by how the invasion impacted your life, but now you're seeing Zelensky saying that this should go on forever, you can see how your sympathies would vacillate over time. And I take Kim's point that it is probably very difficult for the Western audience to get a good sense of what's happening in the region. There's been so much misrepresentation about what the sentiments were in the region that I think some skepticism is probably well advised.
Well, and right, there's no doubt that people want the war to end. Obviously, we don't know. We did interview. We should try to get perspective again from people who are there, because we did interview a couple weeks ago some people who were in Ukraine to try to kind of get the sentiment that was, so the sentiment might have changed, significantly, obviously, over the last however many weeks it's been, as more people die, as more cities are destroyed and leveled. But what kind of concessions the people of Ukraine are willing to live with is right. I guess it's an open question, because there are going to have to be concessions, or it's just going to go on forever. I mean, that's fairly clear.
Yeah. Well, and we have to remember that this is not a real, it is seemingly a fresh war. It's certainly a fresh war that the West is talking about, but actually the civil war has been going on in Ukraine for almost a decade now, since 2014. So there hasn't even been consensus inside of Ukraine for the last nearly a decade. Mm-hmm. So now, yes, it's escalated, it's ramped up, it's now much more on the international stage. People are paying a lot more attention to it. But the fighting in the Donbass has been horrible since 2014. It's been really bad. And in Odessa, massacres in Odessa and Mariupol against the Russian speakers in those regions. So, one sentiment in the real pro-nationalist Ukrainian way of thinking is that, well, these are not real Ukrainians. These are Russians that have been imported in by Russia in order to help take over Ukraine. That's been their perspective. So their nationalist perspective is these people aren't really Ukrainian and they got to go. So they've been extremely harsh to these people, brutal, in fact, murderous to these people. And so but then those people say, no, we are Ukrainian. We live here. This is our country. We're just Russian-speaking Ukrainians and we're being targeted, and so it doesn't mean that those Russian-speaking Ukrainians necessarily want to be part of Russia or run by Russia. A lot of them want to be independent. But again, this is like what Bria is saying. It's pulling people in a lot of different directions, I think, inside of Ukraine. I don't know if there's a lot of consensus. But, what's interesting, I think, mostly, and kind of the point of this whole segment, I think what's interesting is we're starting to see the consensus that there seemed to be in the beginning of this conflict, right? Everybody was coming together saying, we got to stop Russia. And now even in Davos, we're starting to see a little bit of the cracks, right? Mm. We're starting to see people say, some of these, wealthy oligarchs and the billionaires saying, I don't know, maybe we should cool it a bit. So are we going to see more of that as time goes on, or are people going to be rallying around Ukraine more and continuing with endless weapons and fighting? until Crimea is back.
We'll see. Well, tomorrow on Rising, Ryan Grimm and Emily Jashinsky will discuss the gain-of-function debate with two scientists that are on opposing sides of the argument.
They'll also review what you need to know about this week's primary results.
So be sure to like, share, and subscribe so you never miss any content. And for those of you who like to listen while on the go, of course, you can listen to us now via podcast. Look at that good-looking crew right there.
Yeah, the Avengers or the Power Rangers, somebody said on Twitter. Right. Yeah. Right. Oh, there it is again.
Yes. All right, guys. Thank you so much for watching, and we will see you. We'll see you again. Always. We're always here.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.